Welcome back to the Experts in Fire podcast. I'm your host, Mike Vennard, and today we're going to be discussing 3 tips for the pros when installing a gas fire pit. Let's get into it. Hey, Randy, how you doing, brother?
I am doing fantastic. How are you today, sir?
I'm great. We're going to talk on this podcast about things for pros to do when installing a gas fire pit, which makes me think of spring.
Okay.
Which makes me think, we're in the middle of winter recording this, so there is hope. There is spring is coming.
there is hope. It will be. The odd thing is, it comes every year.
It does. It just keeps
doesn't
coming
feel
around.
like it right now.
I've got a buddy who keeps telling me, he's like, dude, you need to find some fun things to do in the winter, like snowmobiling or skiing, and I keep looking at him like, bro, we live in the Metro Detroit area. There hasn't been snow here like that, where you could snowmobile in a long time. At least maybe there's 2 or 3 weeks of snow. And then you chase snow in the state of Michigan. That's what most of my buddies who snowmobile out here do. They're like, hey, they just got a big push of snow up on the northern tip of the lower peninsula. We're running up there to sled. And I'm like, nah, not interested. I'll just sit right here.
Yeah, it's like, because you have to plan for it. It's like, oh, okay, there's snow. Now I've got to load everything up and drive 4 hours to get to it.
Exactly. That's my thought, man. I've got so much stuff going on. I can't drop everything just to go play in the snow. So I look forward to spring. So, all right. Let's talk. We're going to talk spring. We're going to talk 3 tips for the pros when installing a gas fire pit. And I know, man, this is a big deal, Randy. You've got some big customers you're lining up right now with fire pits. So let's jump into it. What can a pro do? Let's start with, I'm just walking on site. Here, I got a customer. They called me. I'm coming on site. What are some tips, 3 tips for that pro when walking onto that site for installing a fire pit?
So, number one, the most important is going to be placement. I mean, the location of the fire feature, the fire pit itself, and what I mean by that is the overall surroundings. Where are we at? Is there anything overhead? Is it a wood structure? Do we have trees? Do we have power lines? What do we have around it? Are we too close to the house, the building? So placement is real important, Mike.
Yeah, we've done some episodes on different, gas fire pit episodes, and I agree that's one of the things that gets overlooked is you look around on the ground and you go, man, this would be perfect. It's a perfect spot in the yard or in your area that you're building up, maybe putting a patio in. But look down, look up, right? You want to... Yeah, people don't even recognize they might have power lines right above them, the main line that's running into the back of their home, or there's just so much to consider. So I agree, placement. But I think that placement also plays into the next one, which is their gas availability, right?
Yeah, gas supply. What's available, whether it's residential, or commercial. Are we running natural gas, or are we digging underground and feeding it from we'll say like 1,000-gallon propane tank? Can we get that fuel to the fire pit? I'll give you a nice scenario is, no, this is a project that's 6 months away, but it was a conversation I had with one of my preferred partners. They're building a new hotel, and they've got to pour the concrete. They've got to get all the concrete in so they can start the structure. They're doing multiple fire features. They need to determine how many BTUs these fire features are going to require so they can set the correct size gas line, which is extremely important. The last thing that we want anybody to do is not have the correct gas pressure to feed one of our fire pits. And so when you're on the front end of a project like that, it's much easier to determine. So fuel source and what type of fuel we're using and how it's going to get to the fire pit is important.
You have fire-related questions, and we have answers. You can email us your questions at podcast@woodlanddirect.com or give us a call at 586-221-3638. We would love to be able to answer them right here on the Experts in Fire podcast. Yeah, so I'm working on doing some projects in my backyard myself. So when I think in terms of placement, I think the gas line at my house enters at the front of the home. And your fun stuff, your fire pit and all of that is in the back of your home.
In the back of your home. Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I didn't mention is obviously there's, portable propane tanks, smaller tanks that can be used. And those will actually, those are more or less used in the residential application. When a contractor's going out, maybe in a case like yours where it's in the front of the house, it doesn't make sense to spend thousands to run a natural gas line, so we can only use a portable tank. We need to know that as well, so that we can guide folks to the right type of fire pit that's going to work with that smaller tank. So
Absolutely. And you think about it when you're the pro, you step onto to the site, most homeowners they're just trying to dream the dream, right? They're looking at Pinterest, they're looking at Instagram, they're looking different places and going, I want to try and make this a reality in my backyard. And for our pros that we work with every day, they're already thinking in terms of, okay, you want to put a fire pit here, or you want to put a fire pit there. Let's check up. Let's look for trees. Let's look for lines. Let's look for anything that could be a problem with fire below it. And then let's look into what kind of gas line do we have to supply to it? Because that customer might be looking at you saying, I want flames that can be seen from the space station. Running
exactly.
running from natural
Yes.
gas.
And we get that.
Yeah, we get that. That's why I brought it up. We get folks who say it that way, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
if you're running the gas line from the front to the back, now we're not just considering the size of the gas line, right? Because, we're going to feed this 150,000 BTU burner, but we're also considering the length of that run is going to determine the size of that gas line, as well as the number of BTUs that burner is going to consume. So there's some math.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's some math that needs to go on here. So as they're looking at that, placement, where it's going to go, and ideal placement is, of course, where the customer would like it, right? But we want to try and give you some insight on sometimes that isn't always the way it can happen. Gas availability, you got to be thinking in terms of how are they going to feed this thing. I didn't even point this out, Randy. If it's just a 20-pound tank that the client can use, let's say they don't have natural gas run to their home, and that's all they can use, then that's going to determine the size of BTUs and the size of pit as well. So just being able to ask the customer that question, how do we want to feed this thing, is going to help determine that. And then the third thing is, how do you want to operate it?
How does your client want to, operate the fire pit? And, just touching on residential first, that could be something as simple as there's a key valve on the fire pit and they turn a key valve, they light it with like a barbecue lighter. It could be a little push button battery operated spark igniter. And then it could be a safety valve system that push button and battery operated. And the safety valve, if the gas supply goes out, it shuts the burner goes out, it shuts the gas supply off. To full electronic ignition because they want to be able to use it with a smart home system or be able to use an app on their phone, which is going to require some other things that have to be ran underground, in a case like that. Commercial wise, it's always going to be some type of electronic ignition system. And then it comes down to is, in a case where when my hotels is, they typically are using some type of timer and an emergency stop, for the operation part of it. So there's the safety part of it on there. There's all of that to consider as far as the operation goes. And kind of, let's go back to the residential real quick. Placement, there's certain requirements if we're using an electronic ignition system, if we're within inside of 10 feet of water, a pool or a fountain or something. So there's some things to consider there when it comes to that, as far as what ignition system, if we're using electronic or not.
Yeah, that is really... Number one, match lit legal in your area? In some places they're getting rid of match lit altogether. They have to have some type of safety system on them. But for a pro walking in, you should know that, right? You should be able to, and I hope you have the resources to be able to find that information and even look it up before you go out and meet with that client, depending on where they're at. And then from there, I had a client 7 years ago that we went through the electronic ignition. We went through the supply for it. You know, I sent him the manuals, the whole thing. They laid down the paver patios. They got everything stubbed up. They put it in, and he's like, Mike, what's this plug? Like, it's called an electronic ignition.
Yeah, that's not good to get.
You know, he was frustrated, man. He was frustrated, and I tried to be so gentle, you know, because he was a great client. He's a great landscaper, but I'm trying to protect him from looking silly to his crew, you know, but they had to peel up an entire row of paver patios, retrench the electric line. And that's a pain. You know how that is, you know, then you got to re-level everything. So that's just something as a pro to have in your mind, that electronic ignition. There are some battery operated options out there, but they're not the best yet. They're just not as good as running the line, being able to plug that bad boy in. And now you can use any bunch of different ways to get that thing rocking and rolling. So placement, gas availability, and then how do you want to operate it? Because it really is walk in and present yourself as the professional to that client to help them understand, I get it. You've been on Pinterest, and I want to help you make the dream come true, but I'm the pro here. Let me explain to you why these things are important.
Yeah, it's the 3 keys to a successful operating fire pit is what it is.
If you want it to work, you need
Yes.
to do these things.
This is correct. Yes.
I love it. I love it.
Absolutely.
All right, Randy. Well, brother, as always, I appreciate you being here with me, man. I thank you for taking the time out of your day and joining us on the podcast here.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
If you have any questions or comments or anything that you want to say, go ahead and email us at podcast@woodlanddirect.com, or you can call us and leave us a message. That number is 586-221-3638. We really appreciate you listening. Join us next time for Preparing Your Pre-Existing Gas Fire Pit for This Year's First Use. We'll see you then.